Let's start this road movie with some road kill!
The last video covered No More Heroes 2. Grasshopper's first real sequel proved to be a rather shallow entry to the series, but still a worthy take on everyone's favorite otaku. Its change in direction could be due to Suda51 being less involved in the project. Wondering what he was focusing on between the launch of No More Heroes 1 and 2? You're about to find out. Shadows of the Damned would be one of the longest and most difficult development processes in Suda's career. The production is so much more fascinating to me than the actual game. With that said, this video will be different from my previous entries of Deadly Individualism. This analysis aims to be more focused on the game's development rather than the finished product, although I will make an attempt to dissect the narrative and give my thoughts on everything they offered. Suda51 and Shinji Mikami became friends during the production of Killer 7. They both started coming up with concepts for a new project shortly after that game's development concluded, and spoke about Koriyami to Edge magazine back in 2006. While they obviously didn't start any real work on this tentative project, they clearly gave it a lot of thought and even had concept art to show off, as you can see here.
The game is inspired by Kafka, a writer I greatly admire. I thought for a long time about how to adapt the environment in his books into a game, to represent the mystery perhaps by applying filters, or dividing them into various missions. When I considered the visuals, I immediately thought of darkness, and I imagined a hero within this night, with a light that would, in a way, symbolize his life. That became the core concept of Kuriyami, literally darkness.
Shinji Mikami's involvement was especially tantalizing, considering he's the father of Resident Evil, a franchise that defines survival horror. This game was also being planned as a PlayStation 3 exclusive. According to the Edge interview, Koriyami was about exploring a cobblestone village filled with strange inhabitants, surrounded by a dark forest with a mysterious castle looming over the citizens that you must eventually infiltrate. The only thing you'd be able to use as a weapon would be your torch, fighting creatures of the night and solving puzzles. Any area shrouded in darkness would be the most dangerous. You would also be able to interact with the villagers that came in all shapes and sizes and would help you in various ways, notably tailors. You'd come to this town looking rather indigenous, but these folks would help you become more refined and well suited as you progress through the story. Kind of sounds like what they had planned was a non-linear survival horror game with some free roam elements. Suda was on a bit of a free roam obsession at the time, No More Heroes being his first attempt at the idea, but anyone can see that it was not too well executed. Regarding the aesthetics, he said he planned for it to have a horror manga feel to it with excellent shading and harsh textures.
When you look at how the contrast of light and shadow is central in our manga, even in comics from abroad, there are a few games that use this sense of darkness. I want to deliver a very specific, totally new pixel shader based on darkness, an artistic texture mixed with various effects. Kuriyami will not be about some hideous monster or evil creatures coming out of the darkness, but playing on our natural fears of the dark and the uneasiness that comes from the absence of noise and life.
I love that Suda understood how powerful subtlety can be when it comes to scaring players in horror games, something I wish other developers would understand. Suda's last thoughts back in 2006?
Kuriyami's ideas are not about violence or eroticism, but fundamental problems in the human mind, which may find some conflict with the rating system. But if you consider the moral elements, video games are basically about killing beings. I think it's almost criminal to diminish the impact of death and may be dangerous to depict it in a cute manner for a young audience. Though I expect the rating level to be quite high for Kuriyami, I also expect the PS3 to be mainly purchased and used by adults. I'm making a game for an adult audience, one that shows what life is and what being human is.
A lot of what he's saying here really reminds me of the original Silent Hill games and their depiction of these topics, especially the PlayStation 2 titles. They say blood and gore on their rating system. I remember blood, but don't really recall any gore in 2, 3, or even 4. No bodies ripped in half, no strings of organs flying all over the place, nothing like that. Well, okay, that's pretty gross. The similarities that Kuriyami was already sharing with Silent Hill made it sound very promising. But after that, silence. Not until 2008 did Suda and Mikami talk about collaborating again shortly after EA announcing a partnership with Grasshopper Manufacture. That's right, Electronic Arts. But hey, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, it's not like EA snatched him up, Suda approached them himself.
I came to EA last June with Mikami-san to present ideas about this project, and they showed a big interest in the ideas I presented. They totally understood what I wanted to do. That's why this deal happened.
However, the game was still in extremely early development. Not only was there no title for this project, Suda claimed he was making this new game for other platforms, not just PlayStation 3. I guess Sony exclusivity talks fell through and Suda can't attain those dreams of amazing visuals. But Mikami is still involved.
Suda-san's scenario and style is not easy for everyone to understand it, but ever since I've been working with Suda, the first draft of the scenario is great. After that, he continues to move forward, and the characters, they behave in a way that nobody really understands where they go.
Both seem to be very optimistic on the matter, and why shouldn't they be? Killer 7 proved that they work excellently together, capable of making gaming and narrative history, although he's also saying that Suda's vision tends to be a bit hard to understand at first. Definitely worth keeping in mind.
Once we work together and collaborate, it helps us. We each work on the parts we're good at. Up to this point, we've worked really well together and helped each other. I always feel very excited to work on something different and new, so I'm very happy about the situation I have now.
The interviewer asks if Suda is concerned with whether having such a big publisher from the West supporting him would be detriment to his punk philosophy. His response?
The Sex Pistols. When they came out, they started to perform in very small venues. In the end, they ended up performing in very large places, but the style of their performance never changed. I don't think the style of my performance will change now that I'm performing somewhere huge.
Wondering why I'm pointing this out? Think I'm trying to imply that this is a bit of foreshadowing? Heh, maybe I am. Still, no title of this upcoming game, no footage, and EA's reputation began to noticeably deteriorate around this time, so fans of Suda's work were worried about him playing with a publisher like them. He did attempt to ease their concerns a few months after the announcement.
I didn't really have this image of EA being a soulless company, just a publisher that publishes games. You don't make games between companies, you make games between people. I have a really good relationship with an executive producer at EA, and he really understands what we're doing.
That's Suda, kind as can be. He really put his faith in them. I mean, if he isn't being fed these words. Just putting that out there. However, almost an entire year passes without a shred of news on the game, until September of 2009 during an IGN interview. Mark Bozon, the conductor of it, was able to get a smidge of information near the end of their time, but not without making the room a bit uncomfortable. After pleading with Suda to tell us something about his upcoming project, Mark noted that he started squirming around his chair, going back and forth with PR, possibly preventing him from telling them anything. And all Suda managed to utter?
It's an action horror game, and it'll be very scary. I guess I can also tell you that the main character has a very cool watch.
Okay, great. It's strange, considering this game was being planned out 3 years prior to this, and the deal between Grasshopper and EA was inked more than a year ago. Come on, not even a brief synopsis? Why did they want Suda to keep his lips so tightly shut? This Suda-EA collab project would finally be revealed in September of 2010. What is this? A third-person shooter with a bunch of gremlins jumping around? This is, definitely not Kuriyami. Looks like Akira Yamaoka will be the main composer as well. The trailers made sure we wouldn't miss that tidbit, as well as the other two big names attached to this. They also confirmed utilizing Unreal Engine 3 for what would be named Shadows of the Damned. This project was part of a strange little family of video games that were made possible by EA offering deals to smaller development companies. This game essentially shared a house with the likes of Rock Band, Bulletstorm, Brutal Legend, Alice Madness Returns, and this horribly mutated creature that was once called Overstrike, all supported by the EA Partners program. Although this means that the deals they made between each of these developers varied in certain ways, seeing as how they weren't always publishers, David DeMartini, head of the program, did give us some insight on their involvement with the project. Suda would say, as well as we would say, this has been a learning experience. I'm dealing with the two biggest names out of Japan. The whole communication thing is a challenge. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to work well with each other, how much feedback we give them, they give us. We've allowed him the opportunity to fully explore his creativity. The key thing is not for us to tone down or try to westernize Suda, but to try and make sure the game gets broad enough exposure that more people appreciate it. Obviously, with EA's publishing and sales team, people are going to get an opportunity to finally listen to what fans have been writing about Suda for a long time. We didn't try and westernize his ideas, we let him explore his ideas fully. Now we're going to westernize the sales and marketing approach so it gets out there and is known by as many people as possible, to give him the best opportunity to sell to a ton of people. Boy, I sure love hearing him talk about big marketing, big sales. Yeesh. Still, I'm not blind to how powerful marketing can be. You need to get the word out there. Take No More Heroes for example. Ubisoft didn't really bother marketing that game at all, despite being such an interesting piece. With Wii's early reputation of having a strict library of kid-friendly games, you'd think Ubisoft would like to show Western players this deliciously gory action title, a game for the older brother, if you will, but they didn't. No More Heroes did manage to rake in decent sales, however, and with a marketing budget of whatever it cost to publish a Nintendo Wii game on Nintendo Power magazine, which was probably nothing, the return must have been nice. The game sold well, and people liked it. Naturally, Ubisoft would agree to publish its sequel, and not market it very well yet again. Sorry guys, I don't think that lingerie line did much for sales. Back to Shadows of the Damned, the potential to advertise in this game may have been what drew Suda to them. Seeing as how he wasn't able to get real marketing support for his previous two Western-oriented titles, he figured EA would definitely have the means and funds to provide ample marketing. After all, Suda himself is pretty vocal on how important it is for the publisher to support games in this regard.
Developers have less power than many might expect in regards of public notoriety. The only thing we can do is to create a high-quality game and intriguing ideas. The most important thing is to just continue this process.
So, finally getting into the game, what is it about? Garcia Hotspur has killed one too many demons and pissed off the Lord of the Underworld. Now he's about to take one hell of a trip to rescue his kidnapped love in the City of the Damned. Well, that's what the back of the box says. The box also does well to drop serious names. A twisted psychological action thriller from the nightmare team of Suda51, Shinji Mikami, and Akira Yamaoka. Suda even gets his name on the front of the box too. That's actually kind of bizarre. Sure, his name reaches the title screens of his games, but I feel like he's not the kind of person who would think this is warranted. None of his other games before or after did so. And what would these three names have in common? None of them are the director, arguably the most important role in a video game's development. Not Yamaoka, not Mikami, not even Suda. No. That title is granted to Massimo Guarini, known for hardcore titles like Open Season and Hello Kitty on DS. Oh, but it isn't really fair to knock someone for working on titles like that. I mean, one of Mikami's first games was Who Framed Roger Rabbit on Game Boy.
I've had pretty much the same amount of creative control since the very beginning. That was not exposed to the media beforehand, so that's why you just happen to hear my name only now.
Keep in mind, what he refers to as the beginning, he means the time EA got seriously involved in the project. EA called him not only to aid their development, but to lead the entire helm. But in secret? Wonder why they would do that.
EA was a really great publisher to work with, because they left us in complete creative control. They just helped us refocus a little bit when we were going too over the top in some portions of the game, and that was probably a bit much for normal markets. But on the creative side, they 100% trust Grasshopper.
Is that so? I thought DeMartini didn't want to tone down Suda, but Guarini is also stating they left Grasshopper completely in control? We're already seeing some flip-flops here, and I'm not even talking about... Well, this is just the beginning of this ordeal. Shadows of the Damned would end up being a third-person action horror comedy, riddled with blood, banter, and Venus. With the aesthetics, music, and introduction, it feels like Grasshopper's continuing to make more Grindhouse-esque games.
Relax, amigo. This is going to be an adventure. Our very own road movie. And the best part is, you never know what's waiting around the bend.
So let's dive into the gameplay. Taking the role of Garcia Hotspur, expert demon hunter, it plays blatantly similar to Resident Evil 4. Gee, I wonder why. Always at your aid is Garcia's spooky friend Johnson. He serves the purpose of being your torch, as well as your arsenal. He transforms at any given time, a pistol that shoots bones, a shotgun that shoots skulls, I use major air quotes because the hitbox is nothing like a shotgun in any other game I've played, and a machine gun that shoots teeth. This is your arsenal against the bloodthirsty demons of hell, as opposed to the bloodthirsty demons of other places. The campaign is mostly linear with very little room to explore, just shoot the shit out of everything that stands in your way, fighting gigantic bosses with obvious weak points. Along with that, you collect white gems throughout the game to purchase red gems, and nothing else, trust me, from a merchant. Similar shop mechanic from Resident Evil 4, here's Christopher.
Well, howdy-ho! Name's Christopher. Now don't y'all be afraid, I ain't gonna bite, trust me.
And that accent is sounding a bit familiar.
Oh, best of both worlds, my pappy said. But what are you doing around these parts? Ain't you immortal?
The name's Andre Almeida. I am a man with a plan. The people will come to me for salvation.
Besides shooting up baddies, there's also solving puzzles and clearing obstacles, some which require you to escape complete darkness. Which isn't really darkness, just blue. Yep, better get out of this blue. There's a few stages that turn the game into a side-scrolling space shooter, which is in the style of paper theater, and one scenario where you and Johnson are basically a mounted hunting rifle in order to make even more dick jokes.
Alright, Johnson, let's take this pole for a stroll.
With all this, it's up to you to destroy these savage demons, while also learning about the town and its inhabitants along the way. It's Garcia's first trip to hell, don't you think he'd want to read up on their community?
Demons do love their darkness.
Then why don't they just cover the whole underworld in it?
Too much of a good thing can kill you. They say to wear sunblock in your world, right? Same idea.
That is pretty much the game itself. Now for the story and characters. Right from the get-go, we're introduced to a shirtless demon killer known as Garcia Hotspur, our Mexican bounty hunter showing his expertise in the field.
Kill me, and I shall be replaced by another, and another, and another still. And wherever you're not looking is where the greatest threat shall be. One at a time, we shall seize the treasures of your life as spoils, and leave only emptiness and despair. My last gifts to you.
Just don't forget to wrap them, puta claws.
By the way, Hotspur, how is your dear sweet Paula? Is she hanging in there?
Hey, nice watch. While on this mission, the demons have reached Paula, and she gets taken away by Lord Fleming.
You let my angel go now, stranger, and maybe I will blow your head off nicely. But can't you see the little peach is coming on to me? Come on to this, pendejo! Oh, demon hunter, your bullets have no bite, no penetration. You need more thrust! You cannot have her back now. But come to my castle in the underworld, and you could still join in our revels. Such a tempting offer. I do love a party. Maybe we could play Pong. Or do shots! I would say you slay me, Hotspur, but you don't. You can't. Now say goodbye to Paula. She has a lot of dying to do. And coming back to life. And dying some more. Yes, help her! Because in the meantime, I'll be helping myself.
You know, G, just because the highway to the underworld is stretched out before us doesn't mean we have to...
Is there a problem, Johnson?
Well, I'm just saying... Demons are buttholes. You really wouldn't like it there.
Says the former demon. What's wrong? Lost your spine?
Okay, look. If you want to go to the underworld, good on you. But you don't know that place.
They have Paula. So the way I see it, you are either with me, or you're not.
No!
Garcia's adventure awaits. To Johnson's surprise, he plans to go straight to hell and rescue Paula himself.
Vámonos! The underworld lies just beyond the sound barrier.
How do you know? That's like super classified demon information.
Not according to the internet.
Huh. This is the Synopsis. It's essentially a buddy cop action thriller of two friends causing a ruckus in hell to save our dear Paula. Along the way, they run into some grotesque beings roaming this hellscape. That tends to look like an old French village for some reason. Nearly all of the dialogue is between Garcia and Johnson. You never feel alone with these two swapping stories and observing the situations.
So when do I get to light up some demons?
And I'm sure you'll have your chance. They hate my light shot. Leaves a nasty rash.
The 7th generation certainly nailed the concept of having two people around to conversate while you're playing. The story does take a few interesting turns, which I'll get into later, but it remains at the same level as it does in the beginning. Garcia and Johnson killing blokes and cracking jokes for this entirely unskippable story. This is all Shadows of the Dam had to offer. How did I take it? I'm not going to lie, I knew what I was in for from the beginning once gameplay was revealed. A strange adventure in a ghoulish world that plays eerily similar to Resident Evil 4. Koriyami has been tossed aside in favor of this, which we'll look into soon. Ultimately, I was still hoping there would be more to it. Come on, these are the two masterminds behind Killer 7. The kookiness of this game is fun, but I want something that would hit me deeper than this ho-hum love story. Now, it isn't all ho-hum, but at a surface level, it feels pretty standard. Damsel in distress, won't stop being in peril, takes a tough as nails and oddly thin man to save her from these ghoulies. That's something I liked about No More Heroes. Sylvia was anything but a damsel and only had full intent to take advantage of Travis for her own benefit. Of course, it helps that she isn't getting ripped apart nearly every time she's present. As for the gameplay, it's fine, but it has feelings of unsteadiness here and there. This was the first time Grasshopper used an engine that wasn't in-house, and this was the point in which nearly all of their games henceforth rely on Unreal. According to some of the developers, they were having a very hard time using the engine, and this likely explains why parts of the game feel so unstable, or at least slightly off.
Working with Unreal is not a common thing in Japan. We definitely had some trouble in the beginning, so we had to hire from abroad for Shadows of the Damned. This is the first time as a team we were using Unreal in Japan, so we could definitely improve our technical side in the next games.
Shit, this is what he says about the finished product? I can't imagine how much of a disaster the early builds played. I can't deny that there were things about this game that I enjoyed, such as the atmosphere. It was so morbid and brutal, kind of like Doom 3's Hell portions if that game had personality. All of this evolved from their concept art, which is simply stunning. I adored the enemy designs, they were so detailed and gorgeous. A lot of the art appears to have transferred over the final game extremely well. From what I can tell, the likes of Philip Peel and Tadayuki Nomaru were brought in as lead artists once Shadows of the Dam was confirmed. On top of that, Kyu Hayashida, famous for notable works such as the Dorohedoro manga, was a guest designer for all the bosses, which stand above all else in regards to enemy design. Her style is heavily detailed and downright oppressive in its grotesque portrayals of creatures. It's hard not to love this. I think it's safe to say just about all of the game's visual appeal came into play post Kuriyami Dreams Crushed. The style seems different and the art fits with Shadows of the Dam's atmosphere perfectly. Masahiro Ito, famous for being the lead artist on the first 3 Silent Hill games, even contributed to the concept art. His work went underutilized, but it looks like some of his designs received attention throughout the game. And while shooting enemies in the face can be repetitive, I did like some of the obstacles the game threw your way, pitting you in instant danger or immediate death. I found Garcia and Johnson's chemistry to be very entertaining. Garcia is stubborn, even a bit dim-witted, and that complements Johnson's cleverness very well.
I can't see for shit.
If only there was some way to shed light on the situation.
Don't mock me, bitch.
Just use the light shot on that lamp, sorry.
Their banter provides organic and digestible exposition for the player. Steve Bloom portraying a fairly illiterate Garcia reading The Legend of Stinky Crow was somehow endearing instead of annoying.
Elliot Thomas was still stuck down on Earth in the boring town of Sinchester.
Sinster.
What?
It's pronounced Sinster.
How do you know?
My cousin's from Sinster. Never mind, keep going.
Listen to that soothing but ominous tune. Of course, I gotta bring up the music. Just about all of it composed by Akira Yamaoka. This is certainly a more traditional soundtrack than what I'm used to hearing from his Silent Hill days, but it fit this world perfectly. And damn if he can't tear apart that acoustic guitar. One major complaint I have about the game is that the cutscenes are completely unskippable. I don't know if it's because they're actually loading screens or not, but boy did it get irritating when you've already completed the game and just want to blow through it again. Speedruns at best are 3.5 hours. You won't be seeing this at a Games Done Quick event. Oh wait, unless it's a sleep-inducing run of a turn-based RPG that takes twice as long to finish, then it's good to go. The campaign does get pretty tedious too. There are portions where they throw you in a situation that's a replica of something before, but made more challenging by stacking enemies or something of that nature. Not very creative, something No More Heroes 2 suffered from greatly as well. But on that same side, this game is really lacking in content. All of Suda's games had more to their campaigns, as well as Mikami's work. On top of this, there's multiple examples that really infer this game was a rush job. There's some concept art of Garcia transforming into this hulking creature. Would have been really cool to have scenarios in which he has to tear into waves of demons as this beast. Guess we'll never see. Look at the bosses for another example. George Reed seemed pretty fleshed out. You fight his typical form that somewhat resembles his human appearance, and his super hell mode. He is the only case of this, as Stinky Crow's more humanistic form is only in the cutscenes while you go straight to his super hell mode for the fight. Same case for Justine, and the sisters Grimm don't change appearance. Although it can be argued that they have two different forms since 2 of the 3 boss fights are basically the same, and the third sister is more grand in its appearance and confrontation. There's also the red light district to consider. I really doubt they just drudged up a bunch of neon signs, make some Terminator-esque music, and call it a day. The visuals in this scenario are so bizarre and imaginative, there must have been at one point plans to make this a full-fledged venue for you to explore, rather than just stand in one place and shoot a bunch of big enemies in the face for 15 minutes with your giant penis. One last thing to consider is the complete lack of post-game content outside of the only one single unlockable piece in this game that's, well, I guess you can call it very hard mode. There isn't even a trophy or achievement for completing it, not that it would help justify its existence. The only difference is that the enemy's damage output is higher and items are more expensive to buy. Compared to the previous games we discussed, even Killer 7, the lack of content was really disappointing. Just look at Resident Evil 4, it has heaps and heaps of post-game content, from extra weapons, to costumes, to arcade-style time trials. It's pretty obvious how pressed for time the project was that they weren't able to provide bonus goodies for players. The whole thing feels like a haphazard mess. While there isn't a lot of information out there, I did manage to have a short talk with Steve Bloom, the voice of Garcia. While I unfortunately did not record our conversation, you'll just have to take my word for what he told me. As far as I can tell, this was never spoken of during any interviews. Steve was brought stunningly late into the project, according to him about 3 days before the game finished production. What's that? No way! How could they not cast the role of the protagonist until just a few days before they're done making the game? The thing is, they did. According to Steve, they originally hired a prestigious Castilian actor to portray Garcia. Big problem, the actor's not too familiar with speaking English, and playtesters were complaining that they couldn't understand most of what Garcia was saying at all. In a panic, they called up voice actors that were willing to get the entire character script done within a day to replace him. Bloom was up to the task, and if I can at least provide one piece of evidence that supports what I'm saying to be true, listen how Garcia sounds in early previews.
What the hell? I don't care who you are or what you are! Give her back to me! Just hang in there a bit more, Paula! I'm almost there! Let the bloodbath begin! My name is Garcia Hotspur, Hunter of Demons! My wrath is your hell!
Not only is that definitely not Steve Bloom, but Garcia sounds much younger. Also, if anyone can identify the replaced actor, I'd love to know. Steve claimed that he read out the entire script in about 4 hours. On top of that, he never spoke to Greg Ellis, the voice of Johnson, due to the time constraint. He had only learned about a year after the game's launch that he portrayed Garcia's partner. This was really surprising to me because their chemistry feels so natural, you'd think they were reading and practicing together during production. Obviously not the case. But anyway, this is just another example of how panically rushed this title was. I had the opportunity to meet Bloom at Katsucon and got him to sign my copy of the game and... hey, is that? Oh, I think it is. A very cool and stylish shirt from Sukuban NYC. You'll love the beautiful new design Owari no Kigen as much as Garcia loves shooting ghoulies in the face. I think Garcia himself can use one of these shirts, instead of wearing a thin leather jacket with nothing under it. Seriously, who in the hell does that? Not that clothing is a common practice for these denizens. So, whether you loved or hated the game, you might be wondering, how did it turn out like this? How did we go from this spooky, subtle idea that was fighting creatures of the night with a mere torch and seeking help from the community, to a more run-of-the-mill third-person shooter where you blast away at naked goblins almost entirely alone for a few hours? The timeline of the game itself will likely never be whole, but a lot of post-game interviews from the main developers really shine a light on what they had to endure when it came to this game. Shortly after the inking deal between Grasshopper and EA, Suda and Mikami started working on Koriyami and discussed his ideas with them more. But he might as well have been speaking alien because the moment he said no guns, EA was not having it.
Originally, I had the inspiration from Kafka's The Castle, and I wanted to create something similar. The main character started off wearing nothing, and he doesn't even use a gun. He just talks to the people in town, and only at nighttime would he fight with demons. EA said, no, you have to have guns. So that's why he has a gun. The Western style is guns.
That's funny, didn't Suda claim that EA totally understood what he was going for? What happened to that? Even after his initial rejection, he tried to work with them and began exploring new ideas with his creative spin on things. However, these would also backfire on him when EA got a glimpse of it.
Paula was originally designed as a tiny girl who lived in your gun. When you set up the gun, a monitor would pop out and her face would appear. She was kind of the main character's partner. When you used the laser scope, Paula would transfer and hop around like a rabbit or flutter like a butterfly. But EA asked, "Why is there a bunny hopping around? And what are you even trying to make? I don't get it." Johnson is the remnant of the idea.
This is so hard to read. There's supervising someone else's project, and then there's this. It really sounded like EA wasn't interested in providing a unique game from an oddball Japanese auteur. They just wanted to simplify and extremely westernize his ideas in order to hawk this mishmash off to a wide audience. Like Mikami said, it's hard to understand a lot of Suda's vision at first, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. It sounds like the people of EA refused to even attempt discerning what he wanted to provide.
Suda's vision and direction, and EA's vision and direction, were totally opposite.
So it doesn't take much to imagine that in the midst of all this headbutting between Grasshopper and EA, the latter got frustrated dealing with them, so they call up a new head to take charge and change the project even further.
I started on the project after EA signed it. I joined 1.5 years ago, and basically there was some problems on the project from a production point of view, and we had to basically redo the whole game from scratch. So I would say the actual production time, in terms of pure game design, historically 1.5 years.
This completely goes against what Massimo claimed as well. I'm not calling him a liar, I just don't think he had the full picture back then, since he came to the original project later on just to start fresh. EA did not trust Grasshopper and did not give them complete creative freedom. I believe they gave Massimo complete creative freedom after giving him this assignment, probably knowing well he would give the whole thing a more Western take. Was it because he's more Western? But that's beside the point I'm trying to make here, which is Suda was the last person they gave complete creative control, constantly spitting back whatever he tried to provide.
Shadows of the Damned was going to be a very different game than the one that came out. It went through about 5 different versions as we got closer to a game that EA could accept. Those meetings felt like court interrogations.
Court interrogations, huh? Sounds like a really friendly environment.
Mikami was great, because he managed to keep a number of my aspects that would have been removed if he had not been there.
How was the game's launch? Terrible. While Shadows of the Damned did receive some positive reviews, it sold a pitiful 24,000 copies in the first month. And this was mainly due to EA's complete marketing absence. No commercials, no TV spots, not even magazine ads. I challenge you, show me a scan of this game being advertised on any gaming magazine. Not a review or preview, just a regular ad. I'll wait.
You really need an extraordinary amount of support to have a new franchise be successful. Unfortunately, we couldn't really do it as well as we hoped for.
I share Suda's disappointment and was particularly surprised to see players not even knowing about the existence of the game.
What's really sad is that EA typically wear their marketing strength like a badge of honor, but once came the time to fulfill Suda's wish to let the masses know about this game, they simply didn't. So the one thing that likely drew Suda to approach EA in the first place, they outright refused them. On top of that, the project feels kinda like a rushed mess, as discussed before. It's also possible that they took some dead assets of early development back when they still wanted it to be Kuriyami. That might explain some of the more bizarre locations, like the cobblestone village areas. Hell, look at some of these storefronts. These all look like shops and services you would have used according to how Suda described Kuriyami. Some of the empty homes you invade are fairly furnished. No doubt these were once plans to have folks living there, willing to help you in exchange for some assistance, not just big fruit. And while this might be stretching it, I can't help but notice these decapitated hens look an awful lot like this one fellow in the concept art. Still, might be too far-fetched to make that connection. Look at this flag. It shows up often throughout the game, but does it look like something that would represent hell? No, just some undescribed European nation. I have no doubt in my mind that some of these areas in hell were originally designed to be a part of the forest and village for once perceived Kuriyami. Look at these buildings and pathways merely gated up or blocked off by elements completely foreign looking to it. How about this marketplace? I bet it was initially designed to have a booming and bustling community, now just covered in blood, butchery, and merely serves as a boss venue.
EA informed us there's this thing called an elevator pitch in America, and if you can't tell your story in the length of an elevator ride, Hollywood won't use it.
Just wanted to show you how much EA lied through their teeth about understanding Suda's vision and giving Grasshopper complete creative freedom, and we don't just want to westernize his ideas and blah blah fucking blah. They didn't mean any of that, hooey. I can go on and on about how disrespectful EA appears to have been to Grasshopper and how Suda had no idea how he and his company would be treated dealing with them once the ink dried. But it's important, of course, to see what the main developers thought of this entire ordeal.
Kurayami had some action RPG elements, like meeting with people in town and putting together an outfit, but it's totally different now. I wanted a project that wasn't dependent on guns. I don't think we've had any other project that changed this much. The enemies were originally something like supernatural neighbors from a dark realm, but EA said that wouldn't make sense. In the final version, it's much clearer that you fight demons, but their existence was originally vague. It had a story where the main character was lost in a mysterious castle town and fighting with unidentifiable beings. It was a plan I struggled with until the end, because I had a deep emotional attachment to it.
It's almost heart-wrenching reading some of this. Suda put his faith in them because it appeared EA was ready to be respectful towards his ambitions and that they were willing to embrace his unique vision, much like Capcom with Killer 7, only to get his ideas spat back at him constantly.
It became a completely different game. That was a bit disappointing. I think Suda was unable to create the scenario he'd originally had in his head, and he rewrote the scenario several times. I think his heart was broken. He's such a unique creator, so it seems to me that he was not quite comfortable with making this game.
Mikami clearly wasn't very satisfied with how this whole thing turned out either, and is even willing to spill some of Suda's truest feelings once the dust had settled and the pathetic sales numbers rolled in. He was able to see that he was unhappy with how things were turning out. As for the director of the game,
Both Suda-san and Mikami-san were quite happy with how Shadows of the Dam turned out as a game.
Now this poses something interesting. Who's lying here? Well, most likely none of them. It's possible that despite getting his dreams completely crushed under the publisher's big hand, Suda was still doing his best to enjoy the production. As downtrodden and spirit-clenching the situation may appear, he was still trying to provide an interesting and fun game. After all, it's not like him moping about would have done much good. Well, with contracts and the sort, he's gotta make the game. But it's also worth considering Mikami was there from the very beginning and knew how Suda was long before that. I have no doubt that if he ever opened up to anyone about the process, it'd be Mikami, telling him how he really felt about the production. Why would he express these kinds of feelings to the director, who was basically an innocent bystander? Massimo didn't do anything wrong. Suda's just trying to make some lemonade in the end. Shortly after the release, the devs went their separate ways. Guarini left to form his own company, where he continues to explore his vision of bizarre entities with unique art style. Shinji Mikami would form his own company, Tango Gameworks, releasing The Evil Within about 3 years later. That game had a man named Sebastian exploring this bizarre village full of demonic creatures for most of the game. One could say this was inspired by Kurayami, but it's worth noting Resident Evil 4 had a pretty similar setting. Although let's not forget the post-launch Kidman chapters, this DLC's core gameplay was stealth-heavy with little to no combat, and of course, right there in front of our faces, Kurayami mode. This lets you play through the chapters in complete darkness with only your flashlight as a means to navigate. Is this starting to sound familiar? It goes without saying Mikami was clearly attached to the project very much, and this was his way of letting out some of that frustration over the ordeal.
The concept of Kurayami seduced me a lot. The universe he wanted to create for this project was really interesting.
So, has Suda dropped the idea entirely, or is there still even a sliver of hope for him to grace the world with something that sounds as endearing as Kurayami? Well, here's something Suda said in 2009, a good year into working with EA.
Kurayami is not cancelled. I haven't given up on it. One day I'll have time to work on this title.
This was clearly the point where Kurayami was shelved and he was looking into different ideas for Shadows of the Damned. Besides that, Grasshopper teamed up with Digital Reality for a project that began fairly close to the end of Shadows of the Damned's production. This would be called Black Knight's Sword. Poor bastards, they definitely had no clue they would be overlooked by a Dark Souls weapon in the Google search results. Anyway, the game certainly has its merits as a challenging action platformer, harking back to the old NES days, and incredibly unique visuals taking on the style of paper theater. Huh? But this game also has some remnants of old ideas Suda had for when he was trying to play nice with EA. After all, he was a co-writer and co-designer of this downloadable title.
This scenario was based off the second draft for Shadows of the Damned, which was originally less horror than dark fantasy. I gave it to Yama-chan to use it however he pleased.
It looks like a lot of these enemy designs in the world breathe some of that Kafka-esque inspiration, although much more cartoonish in appearance. Lastly, a few years after Shadows of the Damned launched, Suda would write a short 2-volume manga series known as Kurayami Dance. A few things I could definitely say about the manga. The main character himself resembles Suda's past life as an undertaker, and there's a secondary character who is a replica of Garcia's very first design in the concept art. According to Suda, a lot of the elements from Kurayami's story made it into the manga series. So in the middle of making this video, I discovered that a group of people in a website known as believeinthee.net started translating Kuriyami dance. It's still a work in progress, but you can start reading the first 2 chapters now. Definitely stay on the lookout so you can discover all of Kuriyami dance and see a bit of that essence that Suda51 originally wanted. Back to Shadows of the Damned. While it was mostly taken away by Suda, I think he still did his best influencing the game and its narrative, remaining as the head writer. With that, he was still able to once more explore the 3 main themes of individualism, society, and death. In regards to individualism, one might think at first Garcia was what the world revolved around. He's the main protagonist after all, blasting and bludgeoning his way through hell. If you really think about it, Garcia is nothing but a bystander, especially without Johnson, who serves not only as his guide to learn more about this completely foreign world, but also the means to killing these barbaric creatures. Hell, we see Johnson rescue him from time to time where Garcia himself appeared helpless.
I've got you. There, G.
Even his method of going to hell sounds like something anyone could have figured out.
Not according to the internet.
Oh, but that was just supposed to be a dumb joke, right? In the end, Garcia is just a regular person who happens to be a demon hunter, which we're led to believe is a somewhat typical profession in this world as we came across another. Kinda like a discreet military. The way the two speak to each other almost makes it sound like there's a small population of demon hunters.
Why do I get the sense you and me are on the same line of work?
Wasting hell monkeys? Who says it's work?
Even though Garcia is just there to drive the story forward, Suda manages to showcase a human element to him. Throughout most of his trip to hell, he's a cool guy insulting the enemies and kicking their teeth in seconds later.
Okay, the excrement is really hitting the proverbial fan here, G. I'm what you might call concerned.
Me too. Concerned this kill is gonna be over too quickly.
But the moment Paula is in his presence, he is quite torn down to the point where he's considerably pathetic.
Garcia, is that you? You came to save me?
Angel?
Seeing her in such a state of suffering and sorrow throughout the game is mentally torturing him, and he doesn't even attempt to conceal just how much it tears him apart inside. This was surprising considering Garcia doesn't have a lot of character to him. He doesn't have any sort of arc. Unlike Garcian in Killer 7 or Travis in No More Heroes, he ends this adventure as the same man we first saw. Coincidentally, this is similar to previous and future Mikami practices with the likes of Jill and Chris in the original Resident Evil, or Sebastian in The Evil Within. Garcia is really just used to take you throughout the story and doesn't have any character development throughout the whole game. Despite all this, Suda wanted to provide true character for someone that seems one-dimensional at first, and he did so through his relationship with Paula. This was so much more than the protagonist looking at a photo of someone they care about and pretending to be sad. We get to see how much Garcia loves Paula to the point where he aches.
Fuck you!
Paula!
Garcia, how long must I suffer? I just want to give up and die.
Don't you dare give up on me, Paula! I swear I'm coming!
Garcia, I don't think I can make it.
And boy, she definitely aches as well. This brings us to Paula, the character that really shines a light on Garcia's absolute individualism. Did you notice how much significance she had to the world of the damned? Not to mention Lord Fleming being so intent on taking her from Garcia. She can't just be the Princess Peach of this adventure, can she? Well, for anyone that has played through the game, did you listen to Johnson's story in the library?
There was a proud and beautiful demon huntress, the first woman of her profession. Dressed in red and armed to the teeth, she fought her way to the Lord of the Dead's castle, where his eyes glowed, some say from rage, others from passion.
"You are bolder than the other hunters,"
he said.
"but even a woman's pride can be broken."
There was a flash of steel and a spray of red, as both the huntress's arms tumbled from her body. She screamed, tears welled up in her eyes. Never had she known such pain. But she would not be deterred, and continued walking toward her adversary. She could feel his breath as he hovered over her.
"I could take you right here and now."
The fists on her severed arms clenched in resistance. Through her tears, she replied, "You might take me, but you will never have me." So impressed was the Lord of the Dead that he put her back together and made her his queen. Time and again he killed her, just to take pleasure in her proud refusal to be dead. But they say she's never stopped trying to claw her way back to the world of the living, where she knows she truly belongs.
Despite all the pain, suffering, and numerous deaths Fleming put her through, this mighty warrior's will to return from hell never ceased. Does this sound like anyone in particular? Taken by Lord Fleming as his own treat, dying over and over again, but only to come back through a fighting spirit and will to live on. It's heavily implied that Paula is a descendant of this old warrior, if not a reincarnation. It even sounds like Paula was running away from something when she met Garcia.
You know I found Paula in a dumpster, right?
What? You said you met her at the supermarket.
I did. It was the bin out behind the dime a dozen.
And you just picked her up out of the rubbish and brought her home?
Why no?
What did she say?
Nothing. Not for weeks. I was afraid to even touch her, you know? Like she didn't belong to me. To anyone.
But something changed.
Me and Paula were eating when the phone rang. Suddenly, she slams her fork down and says, "Don't answer it!"
Creepy.
First thing she ever said to me. But I got up to take the call. She jumped out of her chair, ran to the phone, and ripped it right off the wall.
Whoa.
Then she came and put her arms around me and started crying. It was the craziest, weirdest, sexiest thing I have ever seen. I have been hers ever since.
She is the love of his life, so I don't think it's a coincidence that among all the women brought to his attention, living or otherwise, this warrior was the only one he truly admired.
Her courage is what inspired me to seek my own freedom.
She sounds like one hell of a woman.
Garcia is not the absolute life force, destined to be this godly figure with the ability to rule this world. It's Paula, the one we perceive to be the damsel in distress for almost the entire game, since she is to a degree. Regardless, she isn't some prize for you to ogle at during the end screen. She provided the most influence to the world and especially this adventure. You just happen to be the fool that fell in love with this potential god, which you're forced to take down at the closing act.
Why must I suffer because of you? What about me? Where is my freedom?
Paula, forgive me.
The focus on society was mostly missable lore, but can you really resist checking out these cute posters? There are so many throughout the entire game, and all of them tell you more about how the society in hell works. You'll learn about how they deal with problems their town faces, Lord Fleming, the ruling class, and even what hell's inhabitants think of Garcia.
Is that a wanted poster?
I guess I made Fleming mad. Magnifico.
Who says it's Fleming? You've been ticking off demons on a professional level long before he entered the picture.
All of these aspects are blanketed by the theme of death. Lord Fleming cherishes the concept of death so much that he grants privilege in this society to those that lead the world of the living in a way that impresses him.
Fleming gives his favorite souls special treatment, people who exited the world of the living in style.
Not all demons are damned?
Oh, everybody's damned. The VIPs are just comfortably damned. Little perks here and there.
Such as?
They get to keep their genitals.
The writers found this to be so important, they dedicated these huge illustrated storybooks to the bosses you come across. And please, if I can just gush over these stories again, especially the legend of Stinky Crow. I wish I could have a copy of this story and its illustrations.
The school let out a collective gasp when they saw a stinky crow on the roof. With a triumphant snap, he spread his wings, and a moment later, he had leapt. The next 2 seconds were the most beautiful of Elliot's entire life.
God, that last line really hits me hard. If this were a story written a century ago, that would be how the tale would end. It's brilliant. And that's Shadows of the Damned. It's certainly not a bad title, managing to provide a unique experience when compared to games similar to it, mainly thanks to the writing. It's just such a bummer to see the true story behind its production. There can't be anything worse for a creator than to have their ideas spat away so frivolously and booted off the captain's chair, replaced by someone you have no actual relationship with. Still, I doubt Suda even has contempt for the game or its characters. He doesn't hate Shadows of the Damned because otherwise he just wouldn't acknowledge its existence. In this day and age of developers complaining about disappointing work based on their creations, Suda had no reason at this point to hide his true feelings towards the production of the game.
I cannot deny that the experience made me think a lot. Without the help and support of Mikami-san, it would have been much more difficult to deal with everything. He was able to defend my position and my vision as a creator. I do not regret this experience with EA at all. It was unbelievable, and even if the project went down, we had more highs. In the second half of the development, everything went much better. We had succeeded in finding a common vision without having to sacrifice each of our souls, and that's what I want to keep in mind.
See that? Suda isn't denying the problems he had, but he still digs Shadows of the Damned. After all, the main theme of Kuriyami was darkness, and that ideal still played in the core design. Even if it was in a more shallow sense, it speaks for Suda's attachment to the original project. The important thing to take from this is Suda was able to find ground with everyone and still have fun making the game, despite its extremely rocky first half production that he likely did not foresee being such. The process of developer teams finding publishers is never the same, and I can't say why exactly he went with EA. There's not a lot of information on the contracts, but it must have been convincing enough to lure so many developers just wanting to make their passion project into a reality. And I'm not saying EA is some soulless evil company with full intent to fuck with these projects. I just think the higher ups didn't realize what they were getting themselves into when it came to some of these development teams and are rather stubborn about the creator's vision. They did what other companies would have done when they're so used to certain standards, especially when finances are on the line. Still, I'm not saying what they did is right, and crippling the marketing for the game is completely uncalled for. American McGee, developer of Alice Madness Returns, was under the same publishing roof as Shadows of the Damned. He provided some insight on the business end between his development studio and the EA Partners program while streaming a playthrough of the game. This was brought to my attention thanks to Hikikomori Media. He gave his own input on the entire Shadows of the Damned ordeal, so check it out sometime.
Yeah, we can make another video game, but somebody needs to send us tens of millions of dollars. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. You know, this game, Alice Madness Returns, we had to do a really funky finance setup in order to make it so it was palatable to EA. Even though you would think EA has tons and tons of money and they should be spending all that money on making new games, what EA wants and what they need to promise to their investors as far as funding games goes, a guaranteed return. For every dollar they put into a game in development and marketing, their internal expectation is that they might get $10 back. The problem is, you know, whether or not the thing is going to make its money back, and there's no guarantee of that usually, but what they did was they found a method of finance. It's called bond finance, which is typically used for financing film productions, because obviously film productions are also very expensive. EA uses its line of credit at a bank in order to get a loan from that bank, and as long as we hit our milestones, the bank pays us along the way. EA does not have control, because what they do is they agree early on to our schedule, our design, so that way they can't come in and mess up our schedule and our design and throw us off of our milestones, right? But so under a typical situation, EA might be funding a developer, and then throughout the development of the game, they could be saying to the developer, we need you to make a demo, or we need you to hit this, change this inside of the game because the marketing department says so. But under this bond finance deal, EA didn't have the right to come in and change the spec, to change the design, or to ask for additional features to be added. And so long as we stayed on our pre-agreed upon schedule, that stayed the case. That they just couldn't change anything, and that was one of the things that we had to do, was stay on schedule like 100%, so that EA couldn't come in and make demands of us.
Of course, it's worth considering these EA partner deals might vary, but I don't think it's a stretch to claim this is how it went down with Grasshopper. If you look at the timeline, Massimo came into the project at the end of 2009, but this deal between Grasshopper and EA was already confirmed more than a year before that. A silver lining in the Partners program is that the rights to the game retain to the developers themselves when it's an original IP, and not something EA already owned, which was the case for Alice. The evidence of this comes from the Grasshopper art book. Rights are reserved when necessary, but notice the Shadows of the Damned section has no reserved rights outside of the visible EA logo, meaning Grasshopper fully owns Shadows. This at least means that EA didn't somehow shackle up the rights to Kuriyami, and who knows, maybe someday Suda will want to pursue the project once again. Catch Mikami at a good time to get him involved too. Hell, get Junji Ito for designer. You want to capture that horror manga feel? He's definitely your guy. He was going to help with Silent Hills, so he's likely still interested in game development. Shadows of the Damned is certainly one of the more disregarded games in Grasshopper's timeline. It had some good reviews here and there, but other communities were less than kind to it, and I don't entirely blame them. It's a monotonous game that feels lacking in content, and I'm sure the game's obsession with penis jokes didn't please everyone. I still had fun with it, and certainly found some nuggets of interesting aspects within its seemingly simple story. I think it speaks volumes for how Suda and his company can work in even the harshest conditions. Regardless how downtrodden this project was and how miserable this process must have been for the developers, force-fed concepts by bigwig publishers and working with a foreign engine they could barely wrap their heads around, they were still able to churn out a very enjoyable game. Suda still got to stick around as a head writer to provide his unique input on the project despite how much it morphed. He still tried to give this game his let's punk philosophy, something I should have talked about more in previous videos. The idea of the philosophy is to provide something in your own vision however you can, no matter your background or experience, much like the origin of punk rock. Suda is certainly not the first person to do this in the video game industry, but he lives by it with his company to this day, and this likely explains why most of his games are so unique to each other. EA fought hard against their philosophy, but I think it's safe to say Suda was still able to give Shadows of the Damned a bit of this essence. Coming up next is one of the biggest paradigm shifts in a game company's timeline, an adorable rainbow-ridden adventure with a cheerleading zombie hunter. Tune in next time as we cover Lollipop Chainsaw. Big shout out to Sukaban for sponsoring the video. Check out the site so you can start wearing some high art at low costs. A very special shout out to Fungo and Chaseface for providing their voices for the video. This one likes The Evil Within 1. This one likes The Evil Within 2. And another big shout out to my supporters on Patreon. I'm happy to announce the first Czar of Zombos. He goes by Rain. How appropriate that he would be the first to reign with the highest position of royalty in Ghenry's ghost house. New cool ghoul in the house goes by Laz, aka Lazaretto, aka the Demon Boy, aka something else probably. And if you want to support me and know more about what's going on with my upcoming projects, check out my Patreon page below. It only takes a $1 pledge to vote on the next side video I should work on. Thanks for watching.
What's our life? Demon keeps dreaming of a demon town. Motherfucker, bitch, fuck, shit went down. Fleming's got an itch, scratch it with a bitch. Demon keeps dreaming of a demon town. Ooh, Johnson, that's my name. Big, that's my name, Johnson. Yeah, Johnson, ooh, Johnson.